I never really thought about mirrors before. They're just there, a part of life. You look into them, they show your reflection, and that's it. But now I can't trust them. The first time it happened, I was brushing my teeth. Normal night, nothing weird. I spat into the sink, rinsed my mouth, and looked up at the mirror. My reflection didn't move. I froze. For a split second, it just stood there, staring back at me, mouth still slightly open, toothpaste foam dripping down its chin. Then, like a glitch in reality, it snapped back into place, copying me perfectly again. I convinced myself I was just tired. A weird brain lag. Maybe I blinked and didn't realize it. Yeah, that had to be it. But the thought kept nagging at me. My reflection hadn't moved. That wasn't normal, right? Maybe I was just overanalyzing things. Maybe I had wanted to see something strange, and my mind had played along. Over the next few days, I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. But every time I passed a mirror, I hesitated. What if it happened again? What if I looked and saw something wrong? I'd catch my reflection out of the corner of my eye, and for a brief, terrifying moment I'd think, is it lagging again? But when I turned my head fully, everything seemed fine, normal, just like it should be. I was being ridiculous. That's what I kept telling myself. Maybe I wasn't getting enough sleep. Maybe I needed to stop watching horror movies late at night. But no matter how hard I tried to dismiss it, the paranoia kept growing. I started avoiding mirrors entirely, choosing to look only when absolutely necessary. One night I decided to prove to myself that I was just being stupid. I moved slowly, raising my hand toward the glass, forcing myself to watch. My reflection followed. Perfectly normal. I exhaled, almost laughing at how ridiculous I'd been acting. But then, just as I was about to lower my hand, I saw it. A flicker. A fraction of a second where my reflection hesitated like an old video buffering. I stepped back so fast I nearly tripped. No, this wasn't happening. It was just my brain playing tricks. It had to be. Maybe I had imagined it again. Maybe my nerves were just shot. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching me. My heart pounded with every tiny creak of the house settling. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing sleep to come. But every time I started to drift off, I saw that flicker behind my eyelids. The tiny moment where my reflection hesitated, as if deciding whether or not to follow my movements. Maybe I was just overtired. Maybe I was losing it. Or maybe something else was watching me from the other side. The next day, I avoided the bathroom mirror completely. I got dressed without looking at my reflection, barely glancing at the windows, keeping my eyes on the floor as much as possible. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to see. But it was everywhere. The surface of my phone screen when it dimmed, the dark reflection in the microwave door, the faint ghost of myself in the window as I walked past. I started to feel like I wasn't alone, like my own image was waiting for me to slip. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was being irrational. But as night fell, I stood in front of the mirror again, gripping the bathroom counter so hard my knuckles turned white. I had to see it again. I had to know. I took a deep breath and lifted my hand. My reflection did the same. I turned my head to the side. It copied me. Everything seemed normal. Then, just as a nervous laugh escaped my lips, I noticed it. I was smiling, but my reflection wasn't. My lips were curled up, a small, uneasy smile, but my reflection's face remained blank. It stared at me, mirroring everything else perfectly, except that one thing. My chest tightened. My hands started to shake. I swallowed hard, willing myself to stay calm. Maybe I wasn't seeing things right. Maybe the angle was off. Maybe the light was playing tricks on me. I forced my expression to neutralize. My reflection followed. I smiled again, deliberately, slowly, watching for any sign of change. Nothing. Then, just as I started to step away, my reflection smiled back. But this time, I wasn't smiling anymore. I stumbled back, my stomach twisting into knots, my breath hitched in my throat. But when I looked again, my reflection was normal, just as scared-looking as I felt. My mind was racing. Had I imagined it? Was my paranoia getting worse? I covered the mirror that night. I told myself I was being stupid, that it was just a trick of my exhausted brain. But the next morning, when I pulled the sheet down, I found something that made my blood run cold. A single fingerprint pressed against the glass, and it wasn't mine. What if I was right? I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. A stress-induced hallucination, an overactive imagination, lack of sleep. Any explanation was better than the alternative. But the more I tried to rationalize, the more the paranoia grew. I avoided the mirror for days. I covered it with an old bedsheet, convincing myself that if I couldn't see it, I couldn't obsess over it. But that didn't stop the feeling. The sensation of being watched, a constant prickle at the back of my neck whenever I entered the room. One night, unable to bear it any longer, I stood before the covered mirror, debating whether or not to lift the sheet. My fingers hovered over the fabric, trembling. My brain screamed at me to leave it alone, but my curiosity clawed at me. I had to know if it had been real, if my reflection had truly hesitated, if it had truly smiled after I did. Taking a deep breath, I yanked the sheet away. My reflection stared back at me, perfectly normal. I let out a shaky laugh, feeling a wave of relief. Maybe I really had imagined it. Maybe the stress had finally gotten to me. My reflection mimicked my nervous chuckle, my posture, my every breath. Nothing was out of place. Until I turned away. I caught it in my peripheral vision. A flicker, a hesitation that shouldn't have been there. I spun back around so fast I nearly lost my balance. My reflection was still there, mirroring me perfectly, but I knew what I saw. A cold sweat broke out along my back. I reached a trembling hand toward the glass, my fingertips stopping just short of its surface. My reflection did the same, and for a moment, we simply stood there, me and the thing in the mirror. Then it blinked, but I hadn't blinked. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over myself in my panic. This was impossible. Impossible. I didn't dare look again. I grabbed the bedsheet and threw it back over the mirror, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely secure it in place. I turned off the lights and fled the room, my breaths coming in shallow gasps. That night, I hardly slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. My own face staring back at me, blinking when I hadn't, hesitating when I didn't. I told myself I wouldn't do it again, that I wouldn't go near the mirror, that I wouldn't lift the sheet, that whatever was happening, whatever I thought I saw, was just a trick of the mind. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and fear, when left to fester, becomes unbearable. So once again I stood in front of the covered mirror, hands shaking, breath shallow. I hesitated, my fingers gripping the edge of the sheet, heart pounding in my chest. I whispered under my breath that nothing was wrong, that it had always been in my head, that I was stronger than my paranoia. And then I pulled the sheet away. My reflection stared back, perfectly normal. The relief that washed over me was almost overwhelming. I exhaled a shaky laugh, running a hand down my face. The mirror was fine. I was fine. I reached up to rub my temple, exhaling through my nose, and in that movement, clumsy, careless, I knocked the edge of the mirror with my knuckle. A small crack splintered across the glass. I winced, pulling my hand back instinctively, but it was too late. The damage was done. The crack wasn't large, just a hairline fracture running from the top corner down toward the center. But something about it made my stomach twist into a knot. Then the air shifted. A bitter, unnatural cold spread through the room like a wave, sudden and suffocating. My breath came out in a mist. The warmth of my body seemed to drain instantly, leaving my limbs numb and sluggish. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and an overwhelming dread settled deep in my gut. The temperature kept dropping. It wasn't just cold, it was wrong. Like the heat had been sucked out of the room, leaving behind something unnatural, something that didn't belong. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I had to get out. Now, without thinking, I turned and bolted for the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. The second I crossed the threshold, the warmth of the hallway hit me like a shock, the contrast so jarring that I nearly stumbled. I slammed the door shut behind me, chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked breaths. I stood there, hands still on the doorknob, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My room, that room, was still behind the door, the mirror still inside, the crack still there. But I couldn't go back. Not now. Maybe not ever. Because something was wrong, and I had a sinking, terrible feeling. I couldn't stay away. No matter how much my gut screamed at me to leave it alone, my feet carried me back to the door. My breath was uneven, my fingers trembling as they wrapped around the handle. I told myself I'd just take a quick look, just enough to confirm that everything was still normal. Slowly, I cracked the door open. My eyes darted toward the mirror. The crack was still there, cutting jaggedly across the glass. And then I saw it. My reflection, standing perfectly still, staring straight ahead, not at me, not mirroring my movements, just staring. The fracture in the glass distorted the image, but I could still make out the vacant, unblinking eyes. A pit of nausea coiled in my stomach. My fingers twitched against the door frame, my body frozen between curiosity and terror. I don't know how long I stood there, barely breathing, barely thinking, but then, as if snapped from a trance, I slammed the door shut. I had to get out. Now I sprinted down the hallway, grabbing my phone off the table as I rushed toward the front door. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. My mind was a storm of panic, my body screaming at me to run, to get as far away from that thing as possible. As I was about to exit through the door, a deafening crash echoed from inside the house. Glass shattering. I turned, my stomach twisting in a knot. Against every ounce of logic, against every shred of self-preservation, I stepped back inside. The house was silent, too silent. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I crept down the hall, back toward the bathroom. When I reached the bathroom doorway, the bathroom mirror was gone. Or rather, it was destroyed, shattered into jagged pieces littering the floor. But that wasn't what made me freeze. It was the blood. It was everywhere, splattered across the shards, pooling on the floor, smeared against the walls. And in the center of the carnage were dismembered limbs. Arms, legs, a hand, fingers curled as if still clinging to life, a torso severed at unnatural angles, and a head. Its face was mutilated beyond recognition, covered in too much blood to make out any features. My stomach lurched. My vision swam. My mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't me. The pieces on the floor, they weren't mine. I stumbled backward, my body convulsing in terror. My reflection was gone. The mirror was gone. But somehow, some way, I was still standing here, whole, alive. So then, who or what had just been torn apart? The next thing I remember, I was here. A cold gray jail cell. Concrete walls, an iron-barred door, a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed just enough to make my headache worse. My head throbbed, my body ached, and my mind felt like it had been torn apart and stitched back together all wrong. I tried to piece it all together, but the memories were fragmented, blurred like smudged ink. The mirror, the blood, the body parts, the figure in the shadows, the unbearable cold. And then, nothing. Just darkness. I don't remember being arrested. I don't remember the cops busting down my door. But here I am, locked up like a madman. They won't even tell me what happened. Every time I ask, they just look at me with the same expression, half pity, half fear. Maybe they think I'm insane. I swear I am not insane. Because you see, when I killed my twin brother and hid his body in a hidden hole behind the mirror, I did not expect for his corpse to randomly blow up.